Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're taking a deep dive into the shocking financial collapse and eventual resurrection of one of football's most famous underdog clubs. Okay, let's jump straight into this, because the story of Accrington Stanley isn't just a football story. It's this wild, dramatic tale of community, staggering financial mismanagement, bureaucratic stubbornness, and ultimately, redemption. We're going to look at exactly how a founding member of the Football League was unceremoniously forced out, and how they somehow clawed their way back.
But before we get into the heavy, serious history of how this club was forced to the wall, we absolutely have to acknowledge this famous catchphrase. Accrington Stanley, who are they? Exactly. If you grew up in the UK in the late 80s or early 90s, you know this quote. It was two young kids in Liverpool kits, drinking milk, completely dismissing the club's existence. And it's kind of ironic, really. A club that had actually ceased to exist in 1966 was suddenly immortalized in school playgrounds nationwide, completely bridging the gap between their tragic death and their modern rebirth.
In this deep dive today, we're covering 5 key areas. Number 1, the day football stopped. 2, anatomy of a collapse. 3, the point of no return. 4, Accrington Stanley, who are they? And finally, number 5, the resurrection.
Let's start right off with part 1, the day football stopped.
The sheer, sudden brutality of this collapse was just staggering. I mean, imagine being an 18-year-old player like Mike Ferguson, showing up for training expecting just a totally normal Tuesday. Instead, a representative from the Professional Footballers Association sits the squad down and simply says, "That's it. There will be no more football here." No directors were even around to break the news. The players hadn't been paid in 6 weeks, and the repo men had moved in so fast they literally took the club's washing machine before the guys even knew they were out of a job.
And the human cost here was incredibly stark. 3/4 of the squad had relocated all the way from Scotland, and suddenly, poof, their livelihoods evaporated into thin air. Ferguson recalled how heartbroken local fan Charlie Kilby, whose grandson would actually later become chairman of nearby Burnley, stood outside handing out fivers and tenors just so these stranded players could afford a bus fare home. It was absolute devastation at their beloved home ground, Peel Park.
And here is the really crazy part. An insurmountable debt of roughly £62,000. That is all it took to wipe an English Football League institution right off the map. As one writer put it, to put that into perspective, that amount today is basically one night's losses at online poker for some Premier League stars. But back in the early 1960s, it was a massive mountain that sent Stanley straight to the wall.
Moving right along to part 2, anatomy of a collapse.
So how does this actually happen? Well, it was a snowball effect of terrible boardroom decisions. It's like a giant puzzle of bad choices. It started back in 1955 when a really lucrative lottery scheme was suddenly shut down for being illegal, completely wiping out a vital revenue stream. Then to make ends meet, they sold off their 2 best strikers in the lower divisions, George Hudson and Jack Swindles, and they just never replaced them. Unsurprisingly, their form plummeted, and crowds that used to be around the 6,000 mark halved to about 1,500, which was well below their break-even point.
But the absolute nail in the coffin was the seemingly clever purchase. The board bought a second-hand stand from the Aldershot military tattoo for £2,000. Balsounds like a total bargain, right? Actually, scratch that. It was a disaster. By the time they paid for dismantling, transportation, and re-erection, the cost had ballooned to £15,000. And shockingly, because it wasn't designed for a football stadium, fans sitting in certain parts of the stand couldn't even see the pitch. Just a massively expensive, fatal blunder.
Let's look at part 3, the point of no return.
The chaos of March 1962 unfolded incredibly fast. After a 4-0 defeated Crewe, a desperate creditors meeting was held, of all places, in the local public library. When a public utilities company demanded a mere £400 that the club just couldn't scrape together, the writing was on the wall. A hasty resignation letter was sent on March 6th. But, get this, just 2 days later, the club president, Sir William Cocker, claiming local businessmen had suddenly found the funds, desperately tried to withdraw that resignation. The fate of the entire club hung in the balance for 3 agonizing days until a meeting in London. Now, while local figures like Burnley's chairman, Bob Lord, were historically blamed by the fans for pulling the plug at that library meeting, it was actually Alan Hardacre, the Football League secretary, who controversially slammed the door shut. He flatly refused to let the club withdraw the resignation, hiding behind what he called legal precedent. Accrington Stanley was officially out, the records were expunged, and Oxford United took their place.
You have to look at the absolute absurdity of the era's finances here. Remember Mike Ferguson, the young player who talked about the washing machine? Shortly after Stanley folded, he was sold to Blackburn and then on to Aston Villa for £60,000.
Let that sink in. A historic club was allowed to die over a debt that was almost exactly equal to the transfer fee their own teenage star commanded just a short while later. It's a bitter irony that still stings for sure.
Which brings us to part 4, Accrington Stanley. Who are they? As we touched on earlier, the club achieved mythical status thanks to that 1989 television advert. It associated the legendary Ian Rush with drinking milk to avoid being only good enough to play for Accrington Stanley. While the kids on screen didn't even know who they were talking about, it accidentally gave the town a massive PR boost. It kept the spirit of the Oud Reds completely alive in the public imagination while they were actually battling away in the absolute basement of English football.
Because, while the nation was laughing at the advert, the locals had been working. Starting from absolute scratch in 1968, literally in the back room of a local pub, Stanley reformed. 2 years later, they were playing in the local Lancashire Combination League. But the real catalyst, the real game changer for their modern rise, came in 1999 when they hired a non-league journeyman named John Coleman as manager. He brought this gritty, winning mentality that immediately shifted the club into a higher gear.
And that leads perfectly into our final section, Part 5, the resurrection. It took a massive stroke of financial luck to truly propel them forward. Former Stanley part-timer Brett Ormerod was sold by Blackpool to Southampton for £2 million in 2001. And thanks to a brilliant piece of foresight, a 25% sell-on clause, Accrington received a massive windfall. This cash allowed them to turn professional. Driven by Coleman's management, they completed an emotional and completely triumphant return to the Football League in 2006. And by 2018, under the stewardship of new owner Andy Holt, they defied all odds to reach League One.
Current owner Andy Holt uses this vivid, unvarnished imagery to describe the club's modern reality. He calls them a starving peasant begging for scraps. He pointed out that Accrington's entire annual turnover of around £2.2 million is actually less than what top-flight Premier League clubs spend on agent fees alone in a single year. They are David, constantly fighting a league of Goliaths, but they are doing it with incredible, defiant pride.
Ultimately, what you should take away from this explainer is that Accrington Stanley stands as a profound testament to working-class resilience. They proved that a community's sheer will, sparked in a pub and carried through decades of obscurity, can overcome staggering financial mismanagement and cold bureaucratic indifference. They never gave up.
As we wrap up this deep dive today, I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. Considering the staggering financial disparities in modern sports and the billions flowing at the very top, how vulnerable are the grassroots clubs today? If a club faced a relatively minor shortfall tomorrow, would the authorities actually step in and help, or have we learned absolutely nothing since 1962? Thank you for joining me, and I hope this gives you a whole new appreciation the next time someone asks, Accrington Stanley, who are they?